I'm not sure if you're familiar with phrases such as leave the past behind and focus on your future, or embrace the present and forget the past. Uh, those phrases contain truth on themselves. They contain truth, but um, today I'm going to ask you to do the opposite. I'm going to ask you to look back, to remember those times when God has been faithful. I want to add a quick thought here. It's related to this church that I'm starting in my apartment. I started knowing that God had called me to ministry, and God had given me some insights to my ministry. But what I knew compared to what I didn't know was it was a big difference. What I knew was really small compared to what I didn't know. And that's how our walk of faith works a lot of the times. We may know some things, we may be sure of some aspects of a situation, but there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions that I could ask God, and that honestly, they may not even get an answer. So, I want to ask you: have you ever felt that way? Have you ever been in a situation where you could ask a lot of questions to God, where you had a situation where you could have uh, a lot of things to say, a lot of things to ask God? Have you been in that situation? You know what? When I found myself in that scenario, instead of going towards a path of questioning a lot of things, I decided to look back. I decided to look at God's faithfulness in my past. There's been moments in my life where I've experienced pain, a bit of suffering. I wouldn't say just a bit of suffering, there's been a lot of suffering. But in those moments, I've learned to I've learned to recognize God's hand. And maybe I didn't realize that at the moment, but when time went on, I look back, I remember my past, and I was able to see God moving in different ways. So, have you seen God in your past? Have you experienced situations in your life where you can see Him? Not visible, not literally, obviously, but have you experienced moments in your life where you can look in retrospect and see that God was moving on your behalf, that God was there in spite of the situations that uh, may tell you otherwise? Have you experienced that? Because there's been, or there was, I'm sorry, a Bible character that experienced that. There was somebody that was able to get strength for his presence from past experiences, and that is David. And I'm gonna talk about the story of David and Goliath. It is on 1 Samuel 17:32 until verse 37. Okay. And I'm reading from the New International Version. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." So we see in verse 32 the confidence that David goes into, the confidence that David portrays in this scenario, in this situation. Saul replied, this is verse 13, "You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." So David says, "Okay, I have I proposed in my heart to do this," but then Saul gives a counter argument, and he says, "You know what? You're too young. He's been a warrior from his youth." But then David answers, gives another persuasive talk. He says, "But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's," I'm sorry, not talk, but he response. He gives a persuasive response. "But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by the hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear who rescued me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." I want to read verse 37. I want to make an emphasis in there. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. So, just to give you some context, there's a war. I'm sorry for my accent. There's a war going on in this scenario. The chosen nation of Israel is being what's the word that I'm looking for? Israel is being attacked, not physically, but there's been some signal from another nation that they want to start a war. So there's this conflict that's starting to rise. So there hasn't been a physical war yet, but there's been some conflict between these two nations, and there's this is like the time where they're about to start, but then someone from the Philistines, Goliath, says to the Israelites, if somebody is willing to fight me and wins the fight, then the person who wins the fight who wins that individual fight will win the entire war. So that's the proposal. Proposal is for Israel to assigned a warrior to fight with Goliath. And it should be noted that Goliath was a warrior. He was a tall, a physically tall man, and he was a warrior. He was. It says on verse 33, Saul said that he has been a warrior from his youth. So he's an experienced warrior who has all the characteristics of a really good warrior. And David, on the other hand, is a shepherd who is almost the opposite of a warrior. As a matter of fact, when Samuel went to anoint the future king of Israel, David went unnoticed precisely because of his physical appearance and what he did. So all of his other brothers were the ones who had the appearance of a warrior and possibly a king, but David, like I said, was almost the opposite. And so David, who was someone who did not possess the characteristics of a warrior and didn't possess the characteristics of a really good warrior, decided to stand up for his country. He decided to stand up for Israel because of a past experience, because he had experienced God in the past. So he received strength for the present moment from the past. He received grace for the present moment because of the past. And let's read that again. I know I've read it 2 times already. I want to make an emphasis. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. And we know, a lot of us know the story. David ends up killing Goliath, and David eventually becomes the king of Israel. But we know that we know that because we read the story. But David was in the moment, and you need courage to do that in the moment. So what the thing that gave David courage was that God had been faithful in the past, and he knew that God was going to be faithful in the present. So how do we apply this to our personal lives? Well, I could talk about several applications. Maybe it's marriage that maybe you're part of a marriage that is going through difficulties. That's common in marriage. People go through problems, and they go through some pain in their marriage, and you think of the hypothetical scenarios, and you think of all the outcomes that could be a possibility. But instead of thinking of all the hypothetical scenarios, I would recommend you to look back. I would recommend, I'm sorry, for you to look back. Not only that, but we could talk about financial situations. We could talk about times where you're struggling financially and you don't know how you're gonna um pay your bills, and there's um, financial, sometimes even financial crisis. um, on those situations, you can look back. Not only that, but there could be or you could be in a scenario where there's been or where you've had a friendship for a long time, and that friendship is starting to weaken, and you don't know if you're gonna be able to keep that relationship that's been um, an emotional support to you. I can recommend you to look back. I can recommend to analyze the past and see if God has been unfaithful with you, and see if God has ever failed you, and really ask yourself, has there been a time where God hasn't fulfilled his promises? I can't guarantee the same outcome. I can't guarantee that what you desire is God's, um, how would I say it? It's God's faithfulness, because God's faithfulness is demonstrated in different ways. I can't guarantee a specific outcome, but I can guarantee that God is faithful. I can guarantee that the God who you served in the past, who you knew in the past, is the same God that you know and serve in the present. So, to give a conclusion to this sermon, I want to leave you um, with a thought, or more than a thought. It's a uh, how would I say this? Um, in Spanish is animarte. I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to look back on your next prayer session. Look back. Look back to your past and analyze your the situations that you've been through, and recognize that God has been faithful. Recognize that he has been faithful in the past, and that he will be faithful in the future. So, the main point of this speech, of this preaching, is to look back. Look back.